Hi, you're watching a very special recording of Agenda AWANI right here in Hanoi, Vietnam for the World Economic Forum ASEAN, the 27th edition. And we always get the co-chairs from last year in Phnom Penh. This year, I'm so proud to say I've managed to double my output in that respect. I'm going to interview and introduce to you my second co-chair that I've interviewed. The first was, of course, Datuk Sri Nazir Razak, but the second is the global managing partner of McKinsey & Co. And McKinsey is very important. You know, if you read BBC and Google him, you'll find how tough it is to be right at the top of McKinsey, but that's a story for another day or time. But I'm just going to welcome Kevin Sneeder.
Pleasure to be here.
And I'm just going to go straight to the point. I don't want to ask about what you said on stage yet. How do you manage to wake up at 5:30 a.m. every day, go for a workout and work out your strategies for the day, corporate-wise? Because that's very Asian. I'm going to say it because we're in Southeast Asia. That's very Asian. I was born practically in the muddy flats of, rice-based economy, paddy fields, and my grandparents would be there right at the break of day, and they work their bones off right until the sun's going to set. So when I read about you, I think you're Asian at heart, or Braveheart of the consulting firms of the world. And BBC put McKinsey as bluest of the blue, but I think you're the blue eye of the bluest, because it's not easy to be where you are. And the Asian values, you've been in Asia also for McKinsey, it's also like that, you know, hardworking, passionate. How do you look at it? Maybe I'm too romanticizing things, but
I don't think you are.
That's what I get.
I come from Scotland. I'd like to think some of the values are also in Scotland.
Okay.
We work hard.
Okay.
We value work.
Yes.
Look, Asian values have been part of what has led this part of the world to be so significant when it comes to driving the rest of the world. The growth that this part of the world generates is absolutely the heart of the global economy. And I have seen right across the region people who work very hard, people who care deeply and value their education, people who believe that tomorrow can be better than today, and people who, no matter the challenges they've had in life, feel that they can always surmount those. Those are wonderful values.
Correct.
And the energy and the optimism of Asia is what's kept me here. And if there is one thing I can observe, it's when I go away from Asia, I miss the energy, I miss the vibrancy. And you really feel it here in Vietnam. I don't know if you've seen enough of it's been hard because we've been in this bubble.
Yes.
But even just looking at the energy here and looking around this little area that we're in, which didn't exist only 5, 6, 7 years ago, and now is home to an enormous conference centre, but more importantly, a whole series of businesses around it. That's Asia. And Vietnam is a small part of bringing that to life.
Yes. You're one of the more positive voices at this World Economic Forum ASEAN. And you keep on giving that number that MGI, you know, McKinsey Global Institute, was giving out at the press conference, where you pick 8 economies that is standing right up there in emerging economies of the world. That is very amazing in terms of growth.
That's right. I am an optimist about Asia. Let me be very clear on that. And the reason for that is the work that we did that looked at 71 emerging markets over 50 years. And that work led us to see that 18 of those emerging markets had outperformed their so-called higher income counterparts, the US, for example. Of those 18, 8 are in ASEAN. And just think about what that means. It's a tribute to the ability and the resilience of these economies. Of course, it recognizes that they started in a place where there was a lot of poverty. There was a lack of income. One of the greatest achievements of the ASEAN countries is the fact that that poverty has been reduced, not eliminated, but reduced. And if you recognize that has happened over an extended period of time, I think there's a reason to be an optimist. I think there could be near-term challenges, don't get me wrong. But I really do believe that the fundamentals remain in ASEAN's favor.
From where you're sitting, because you look at the world, and we know that McKinsey exists in many markets across the world, I just want to get your picture of this, because getting people out of poverty is also a very important discussion at World Economic Forum ASEAN. And if we look at China, within one generation, they've managed to take out hundreds of millions of people out of poverty.
They have.
Within one generation.
Well, it's not just China, it's also India.
Yeah.
In fact, if you look at the countries that we studied, they had reduced poverty levels from 1.7 billion people down to 580 million. In other words, 1.1, 1.2 billion people taken out of poverty. And that is an achievement. That achievement is not just China, it's India, it's Indonesia, it is including your country. There are, I think, many countries that have contributed to it. Of course, the size of China and the extent to which they had this issue means that the biggest number is indeed in China.
Okay. How does that matter to the walls and powerful corridors of the big corporations of the world? Because you're refreshing to me, because not many from that high of a ceiling in the corporate world would be talking about poverty.
Well, I think it's important we do. I grew up in Glasgow.
Okay.
Glasgow's an industrial city. I think it's a wonderful city. But I know and have seen what it can be to be in a place where you don't know if you're going to pay the bill at the end of the week. So I think many business leaders remember where they come from and do care. I think, you know, if you wanted to be selfish, the other statistic that goes to the 1.7 billion is 330 million people have entered the consuming class. People who've got enough disposable income to pay the rent, keep a roof over their head, and then go and invest or buy consumer goods. So if you want to just think about the economic engine of the world, one step is eliminate poverty, certainly reduce it dramatically. The second step is bring people into a place where they can actually afford to consume. And indeed, in ASEAN, that's really what's happening right across the region. We're seeing the emergence of the consuming middle class. The great strength of ASEAN, of course, is 650 million people. Of those 650 million, we are seeing continued growth in those who are able to spend. The people watching this TV show are probably part of that group. Okay. It's very important that continues to develop as well.
So inclusivity is very important, and we've talked about poverty. But before I go to the first break, I want to just throw a question first, because, you know, I think you and me, we're not that far, the years that we were born, and we're both football fans. So I'm going to go and say that we're young at heart. So this generational thing needs to be looked at, because there will be new powerhouses of energy in terms of human capital and talent in Asia and Southeast Asia that would be never before had any inkling of what the 20th century was. When they opened their eyes, it was already the promise of the 21st century, with the end of the third industrial revolution and the fourth industrial revolution. So how do you look at that? It's great to give big numbers and everything else, but if there's a chance to hit reset, this is it for Southeast Asia and Asia to a larger extent. And what would your advice be for the leaders of now? Because what they do or choose not to do will be already setting back this new group of generation. We go for the first break. Once we're back, we talk about that. And if we have time, whether Rangers or Liverpool is better or not.
It's Celtic.
No, because I want to say Rangers because
Steven Gerrard.
Let's go to the break first and come back for that. I was just kidding you. You're still watching the best, one of the best, if not the best interview at the World Economic Forum ASEAN 2018 right here in Hanoi, Vietnam. I have to say Glasgow Rangers for Steven Gerrard, because he's like a typical Asian, also work hard, successful, but still humble. But Celtic is the one you need.
Thank you, that's better.
To know, because otherwise Kevin would not be sharing top wisdom and secrets with us. But I'm just going to allude to the question I was putting to you before. You get what I'm getting to, right? That leadership, which WF looks at, maybe new kind of leadership needs to be looked at. What's your...
Well, I do think the qualities of leadership that are going to be needed are very different, because technology is changing the way in which businesses operate. It's changing society, but it's changing business. A small example, you and I come from a generation that's benefited from rising incomes, the growth of ASEAN. What the next generation, the generation one before us, they're going to be the generation that has to deal with their jobs being impacted by that technology, jobs being automated, jobs being changed. And for them, it's going to be a question of reskilling. And I think one of the great challenges leaders now have is how do they take their workforce and reskill it, encourage them to pick up new technologies, go back to education. That's going to be the challenge of leadership. Well, the second challenge leadership's going to have is we've enjoyed a period when I think in general there's been a rising tide. The truth of the matter is growth is going to look quite different. Different parts of both ASEAN and overseas are going to see different growth rates. And leaders are going to have to ride through that challenge and keep people focused on doing what's needed to be done to improve productivity and improve jobs.
That was actually my question at the MGI press conference where I asked, so we've subscribed to the growth mantra. You know, Malaysia called the tiger economy before, but that didn't seem to graduate us to where Singapore is, or at that level of developed nation. So maybe there's a new mantra needed with new kind of skills and leadership. And since McKinsey consults and advises a lot of leaders, business, government or otherwise, I would like to pose this question to you. And it was said there by the Vietnamese panelists, the co-chair also, technology changed very fast. People, especially young people, also are following that technology very fast. But governments couldn't change that fast or won't change that fast. I need your wisdom on that.
Well, that is a big challenge. And I think my fellow co-chair was very explicit. He felt that the challenge of the pace for government here was the thing that was holding them back. I think as we look across governments, I think the governments do have to find ways to embrace technology and do need to find ways to move as quickly as the technology is moving. The reality is we need government. We need government to provide the education that's going to allow people to be able to pick up new skills and compete in a very different world than you and I grew up in. So I don't think we can blame government, but we do have to recognise that government needs to change. And I think the governments that can find a way to embrace technology and fund and help focus education and the development of capability in the country on the skills that are going to be needed, those are the governments that are going to make a difference. So I really hope this government here in Malaysia, but other governments right across the region are able to embrace technology and really deploy it to the advantage of the people.
I want to drill down a bit micro, because people keep talking about government at the topmost, the cabinet, the prime minister, the president, but they are only a few people because they have to work with the bureaucracy called the civil service. There's a civil service in Scotland, there's a civil service in London, for example, so there's a civil service here. So what chances are there for this group of people to move up? Because some of them were born earlier than both you and me, and there's a mix of a lot of generations and education. How could they be empowered to move forward? Because that's sort of an antithesis to what they were told before, what they were trained for.
You know, I think there's two ways of looking at it. If you view the civil service as there to preserve things the way they were before, then that's going to be challenged. But if you view the civil service as a key enabler of taking technology and applying it to vast numbers of people, then the civil service becomes part of the answer. I think the reality is we have the civil service. It's therefore vital that the civil service embraces the technologies and becomes part of putting them on the ground where they're needed. I don't think there's any way to avoid the reality that somebody's got to make the decisions that gets this technology out into the fields.
Do you think a reboot is best, or modifying things are best? Because when I look, Malaysia has been free from colonialism for 6 decades, but when I look at Estonia, oh my God, they're like a teenager compared to us, and they're already there in the topmost ranking of the world. And it's because when they decided to do it their own way, they just choose to reboot everything and start with their own way. Do you think that's the best way? Because that's one example, but they're a smaller country. And
I don't presume to know Malaysia well enough to give a view.
For the whole of us.
But I think if I look at ASEAN, I think what's very clear is if you take the ASEAN Secretariat, I think the conversations here are very much saying how can the ASEAN Secretariat become an enabler as opposed to a regulator that slows things down. And I think that shift becomes important. It's really a shift from being the overseer and the regulator to the enabler and helping provide the capabilities. That's a big shift to ask a civil service organisation to do, but it's essential.
Datuk Sri Nazir Razak, your fellow co-chair, he thanked WF is one, but he picked out the fact that all the ASEAN country leaders that were here subscribed to the Fourth Industrial Revolution. And that's why he thanked the WEF. Because in some other parts of the world, they're still debating whether it's the Fourth Industrial Revolution or not. So, for you, where do you take the positive from there? For him, it was the glass half full. For you, I'm sure it's not just the glass half full, but what's in the full side and what's in the empty
Well, I
side.
think you're absolutely right. It's a positive statement of intent, but now we need action. And if you think about the action that's needed, the action has three parts to it. One part is to actually do the things that give people access to digital, the capabilities, the engine that actually makes this fourth industrial revolution take place. The second thing is education, reskilling, as I said earlier, providing the skills that are needed for the jobs of tomorrow, not the jobs of yesterday. And the third part is investment in infrastructure, not just the technology infrastructure, but the physical infrastructure to move goods, logistics, all that goes with making the most of this revolution, and it is a revolution. Let's be clear, it's a real change in the way business operates. So it's good news that the leaders spoke very eloquently about why they believed in that revolution, but they have to take the eloquent words and turn them into action.
Okay, I think I have to go for the last break, but once we are back, it was so refreshing for me, even being a citizen of Southeast Asia, when I heard in the closing plenary of the co-chairs that the minister from Vietnam said, yes, every revolution has bring good things, right? And this is coming from a country where some people think it's a bit difficult. I lost two panelists, my original panelists, because they were not allowed to come in my moderated session. But he said that, okay, putting it into action is one thing, but I want to look at the practical side of things, because when governments in Southeast Asia have to choose their policy, they have to work with a certain amount of limitation, national budget and whatever else. So, for example, if I want to solve mobility or traffic jams in the city center, then I spend about, let's say, 10 billion US dollars. But what if that 10 billion US dollar I really put in a blue ocean of a thing that would then solve things tomorrow, but over the medium to long term, give all the things that you have said, access, education, and also infra. So I just want your thoughts on that, because it's sort of a way to alternatively debate what we're doing right now. Because I think the great thing about the fourth industrial revolution is it must come accompanied by a pluralism and diversified thinking of thought leadership. And that will try to get the wisdom from an old Scottish mind right after this short break. If you're a Glasgow Rangers fan, stay away. But if you're a Glasgow Celtic, and if you're a Liverpool fan, MU, this is a conversation. I have so little time with great people, but limited resources, and advisory is very important. So let's bring the debate out a bit. 60 billion for a gigantic project to solve traffic jam is well good, but 60 billion used for the fourth industrial revolution readiness is even better. So I like your thoughts on that.
Well, I think the key thing is to be very clear on the kind of investment that's needed and where that investment goes. The fourth industrial revolution is a big set of words. What it actually means is really having access to a technology base that can support manufacturing in different ways than it's being done today. And if therefore you take your 60 billion and you invest in that and you deliver higher broadband speeds, more people with access, more businesses with access, then of course that's money well spent, and I think the returns will reflect that. I can't make a comparison between a train and a computer, but what I can say is that the requirements to invest in infrastructure are not cheap. And one of the challenges of the fourth industrial revolution is I think it does favour those who can deploy resources at scale. It's not about small investments, it is about scale investing. And that is one of the challenges, and therefore what that means is that countries will need to make some choices and focus in on what the value they'll get from investing in the backbone and the infrastructure that this revolution does require.
So isn't it also the age of partnership? Even before the fourth industrial revolution era, since the 90s, there has not been a single winner of the Nobel Awards. It has to be multidisciplinary. So why look at, for Malaysia it's 30 million, for Indonesia it's 230. look at 650 or 60 million people.
Agree with that.
Maybe this is a part, instead of looking at resources limitation, look at partnership and go as one. Forget national interest.
I agree with you. Look, well, first of all, national interest will always be there. But, here's the but. This fourth industrial revolution advantages scale. It advantages an economy of 650 million people. It disadvantages a small economy. Why? Because the cost of technology is not nothing, it's expensive. Why? Because if you don't have scale, then the businesses that start in Malaysia, they won't have the scale to become big businesses. And what will end up happening is the big platform operators from other parts of the world, they'll come here, and it'll be their businesses that flourish. So I do think this is a call to action for ASEAN. It's a call to action in terms of working as more as one, a call to action in making sure the non-tariff barriers come down just as the tariff barriers have come down. And it's a call to action in allowing people and capital to move more freely across the region. That is different. So this is really at the heart of the fourth industrial revolution. To succeed, you need scale. And a scale market of 650 million people is very different than one that is of 100 million people.
So it's only our thinking that might be limiting what we can do. That's one. However, talking about thinking, advice, and everything else, McKinsey consults. How does the fourth industrial revolution, like data analytics, sentiment analysis, even predictive abilities, how does that influence what you do now?
It changes what we do. I think we've been changed and are changing to reflect this revolution. So the kind of people that work at McKinsey now look very different than before. We have far more technologists, analysts, people with quantitative backgrounds, but you know, we also have a lot of more creative types. We hire people, in fact, we're one of the largest design agencies in the world because we believe it's the marriage of the sciences, the hard data, with the creativity of the arts, people who are in the design business, that is now required to solve very tough problems, or more importantly, capture very big opportunities. So it's profoundly changed who we are and what we do. And I think that change is only going to accelerate because the pace at which this is unfolding across the world is moving at a very high speed.
Do you accept all journalists doing that equation?
We will certainly. You'll be more than welcome to join us. The only hold-up I've got is you seem to like Rangers, and I'm very worried about that.
We can reset that. I can buy replica shirts. Before I let you go, there was an interesting point made by the co-chair of the Open Forum, the panelists, co-panelists of the Open Forum, Professor Aniko of Singapore, SMU. She was called to China, and she thought, like, China have bigger data than Southeast Asia or even Singapore, but the data sets in China, they are very homogeneous mainly. The data sets in Southeast Asia, even though it's 650 only, they are so plural and diversified. So as you use AI, data analytics and all this, like you said, design is important, but drilling it down to the diversity of it.
Look, I think that's undoubtedly true. The reality is, in diversity there is strength. So I would suggest that for this part of the world, the ability to be able to handle data from very different sources with a different perspective, yes, it can be a disadvantage because there's a complexity to that, but the advantage is you get a far richer answer. And so I think it is true that the data, the analysis that can be done in Southeast Asia offers huge value to the Southeast Asian economies and the businesses and governments in those economies. But it is more difficult. And I think therefore it is one more reason why you need scale when it comes to the technical skills that make the most of the kind of data you've just been highlighting.
Okay, they're telling me to wrap up, but I just want to ask you this. 120 over countries where your company is present, how do you make them agile and nimble for all this change that we're talking about? Because the moment you use AI, data, analytics, IoT, you don't look at what's stopping you. You say, that's where we have to go. We go there now. But you're working with people. How do you make them move fast enough? I want to share that secret with all the audience members.
It's a great question. I think the honest answer is we empower people at the front line. We're a partnership. We believe partners make the best decisions. You give them the information and they decide. And that's what I think the wonder of AI is. It provides a lot more people with access to information and insight. I'd like to believe my partners now have a lot more insight, a lot more action they can take, and I believe in them. So the Malaysian partners, they're responsible for what we do in Malaysia. They don't take their instructions from me, because as a partnership, you trust the people on the ground to make the right decisions.
Okay. One last predictive analysis. Rangers not good enough to challenge Celtic this time around.
Not this year. Not this year.
Shake hand on that.
Thank
and
you very
everything
much.
else that you have said,
Thank
I
you.
do agree with you. I love Stephen Gerrard, but not enough time for him.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Kevin
Enjoy being with
Sneeder.
you.
Thank you to McKinsey. Thanks to the World Economic Forum. I hope this is one of the best interviews ever, but you are the judge. Send us your own feedback to all the platforms that we have. But this is me, Kamaru Barin, signing off with producer Fida and cameraman Rizal from Hanoi, Vietnam at the World Economic Forum 2018 ASEAN level. Goodbye.